I never imagined betrayal could have a price tag. $2.7 million to be exact. When trust shatters, it doesn't just break, it cuts you open, leaving wounds that time alone can't heal. My name is Leah, and this is the story of how my husband's deception led to the most unexpected justice I never knew I needed. Trust is a fragile thing, isn't it? We build our lives around it, constructing relationships brick by brick, never questioning the foundation until the whole structure comes crashing down. That's what happened to me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For 12 years, I believed I knew the man I married, Alan, my college sweetheart. The man who promised to stand beside me through everything. The man who stole my inheritance to build a life with someone else. Looking back, perhaps I should have seen the signs. They were there, subtle but persistent, like whispers I chose to ignore. When you love someone, you create stories to explain away the inconsistencies, the late nights, the distracted conversations. You convince yourself that your doubts are just insecurities, that your instincts are wrong. But your body knows. Your mind knows. It's your heart that refuses to accept what's already clear. I was 35 when my grandmother passed away. Grandma Rose was the backbone of our family, strong, principled, and fiercely protective of those she loved. She'd built a small real estate empire from nothing, buying properties throughout the city when prices were low, holding on to them through economic downturns, and watching their value multiply over decades. We all knew she was comfortable, but none of us, not even my father, realized just how successful she'd been until the reading of her will. To my granddaughter, Leah Marie, who has always shown the same determination and integrity that guided my own life, I leave my entire property portfolio and investment accounts, valued at $2.7 million. The room had gone silent. My father squeezed. My hand, tears in his eyes. My cousin Andrea nodded approvingly. She'd inherited Grandma's vintage jewelry collection, which was what she'd always coveted. And Alan, my husband, sat beside me with an expression I can only describe now as calculated. Surprise. At the time, I mistook it for shock, for happiness on my behalf. How could I have known that behind that carefully composed face, he was already making plans? Plans that didn't include me. That evening, as we drove home from the lawyer's office, Alan was uncharacteristically quiet. When I asked what he was thinking, he took my hand across the console of our modest sedan. "I'm thinking about how proud your grandmother must have been of you," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "And how this changes everything for us. Changes everything." 3 syllables that would prove more prophetic than I could have imagined. For a decade, Alan and I had lived modestly. We'd met in our senior year of college. I was studying architecture. He was in finance. Our first apartment was a cramped 1-bedroom with a leaky faucet and neighbors who fought loudly at 3 a.m. But it was ours, and we were happy. When we finally saved enough for a down payment on a small house in the suburbs, it felt like we'd achieved something monumental. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Content. Or so I thought. Alan had always been ambitious. In the early years, I admired his drive, his determination to climb the corporate ladder. But somewhere along the way, ambition had transformed into something darker, a constant dissatisfaction, a perpetual hunger for more. The promotion that should have brought celebration only highlighted what he hadn't achieved. The salary increases never seemed enough. Our house, once a source of pride, became too small, too outdated, too far from the city. My inheritance should have been the answer to his prayers. And in a way, I suppose it was, just not in the way I expected. The weeks after the will, reading were a blur of paperwork, meetings with financial advisors, and long conversations about our future. Alan suddenly took a keen interest in the properties, asking detailed questions about their values, locations, rental incomes. He suggested I allow him to manage everything. After all, finance was his area of expertise, not mine. You shouldn't have to worry about all this, Leah, he insisted one night as we sat at our kitchen table surrounded by documents. Your grandmother wanted to make your life easier, not burden you with property management and investment decisions. His concern seemed so genuine, his logic so sound. And wasn't that what marriage was? A partnership where each person contributes their strengths? I signed the papers he put in front of me. Power of attorney, joint access to accounts, administrative control over the property management company Grandma Rose had established. I trusted him completely. That was my first mistake. Perhaps if I'd paid more attention, I would have noticed how Alan began staying later at the office, how his phone would go silent when I entered the room, how he started taking weekend trips for work conferences that couldn't be rescheduled. But I was preoccupied with my own career, with the grief of losing my grandmother, with the sudden responsibility of an inheritance I never expected to receive. The day I discovered the truth began like any other. A Tuesday in April. Unseasonably warm. I remember because I'd worn a light dress to work, one that Alan had always complimented. I came home early, a migraine building behind my eyes, hoping to lie down before Alan returned. The house was quiet. When I entered, slipping off my shoes by the door as I always did. I took 2 painkillers, drank a glass of water, and was heading for the bedroom when I noticed Alan's laptop open on the dining room table. I've never been the type to snoop. I've always believed that privacy is essential, even in marriage. But something, call it instinct, call it fate, made me pause. The screen displayed an email, and at the top was an address I didn't recognize. 42, Lakeside Drive. I sat down, my migraine momentarily forgotten, and began to read. I've always been a methodical person. It's something my grandmother instilled in me from an early age. Be thorough, Leah, she would say as we sat at her kitchen table, reviewing property ledgers together. The details matter. Growing up in Cedar Grove, a small suburb just outside the city, I watched Grandma Rose build her business with nothing but determination and sharp intelligence. My parents divorced when I was 7, and while my father did his best, it was Grandma who became my constant. Every Saturday morning I'd bike to her house, a modest 2-bedroom that belied her growing wealth, and she'd teach me about investments, property values, and the patience required to succeed. Money doesn't appear overnight, she'd explain, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she reviewed tenant applications. It grows slowly, like a good garden. You plant, you tend, you wait. My father, Marcus, had inherited her work ethic but not her financial acumen. He taught high school chemistry, coming home with stories about explosive experiments gone wrong and teenagers discovering their passion for science. We never had much, but we never felt poor either. Dad made sure of that. We're rich in all the ways that count, he'd say, wrapping an arm around my shoulders as we walked through the park or cooked dinner together. I believed him. I still do. College was only possible because of Grandma Rose. She paid my tuition without hesitation, though she had one condition. I had to work part-time and manage my own budget. Wealth without responsibility creates weakness, she insisted. I took a job at the campus library, cataloging books in the quiet hours between classes. That's where I met Alan. He was studying for his finance exams, surrounded by stacks of textbooks, his dark hair falling across his forehead as he concentrated. I noticed him first because he was always there when I arrived for my shift, and still there when I left. One evening, as I was shelving returns near his table, he looked up and smiled. "You're the only person who puts the books back correctly," he said. It was such an odd first comment, so specific and unexpected, that I laughed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We started talking. He told me about growing up in Bedford Falls, a working-class neighborhood across town. His father had abandoned the family when Alan was 12, leaving his mother, Sheila, to raise 3 boys alone. She worked 2 jobs. He told me over coffee the following week, cleaning offices at night and waitressing during the day. Sometimes I wouldn't see her for days. I remember feeling a surge of admiration for his resilience, for the drive that had brought him to college. Despite the odds, it created a connection between us. Both raised in homes where one parent did the work of 2, both determined to build something better. Our relationship developed slowly. We studied together, shared meals at the cheap diner near campus, and gradually revealed our dreams to each other. I wanted to design sustainable buildings, creating spaces that would last for generations. Alan's aspirations were less specific, but more ambitious. "I want security," he said one night as we lay on a blanket beneath the stars, the campus quiet around us. "I want to know that I'll never have to worry about money like my mom did." I understood that desire, respected it. And when he kissed me, for the first time that night I felt like we were sealing a pact, 2 people committed to building a stable future, together. After graduation, reality hit hard. The architecture firm that hired me paid entry-level wages that barely covered my share of rent. Alan found a position at a mid-sized financial services company, not the prestigious Wall Street firm he'd hoped for. We moved into that small apartment I mentioned earlier, combining our meager furniture into a hodgepodge of styles that somehow worked. Those first years were lean but happy. We budgeted carefully, celebrated small victories, and supported each other's career progress. When I passed my architectural licensing exams, Alan surprised me with a drafting table he'd found at a secondhand store and refinished himself. When he received his first promotion, I framed his new business card and hung it beside our bed. We married on a perfect autumn day in the botanical gardens, a simple ceremony with only our closest friends and family. Grandma Rose, already in die. Her 80s then, danced with more energy than guests half her age. She pulled me aside during the reception, her eyes bright with emotion. "He's a good man, Leah," she said, watching Alan chat with my father across the room. "But remember what I taught you? Always maintain your independence. Your grandmother didn't come this far to see you lose yourself, even in love." I nodded, hugging her tightly, though I didn't fully understand her warning then. Alan and I were partners, equals. I couldn't imagine that ever changing. Our first home was a small ranch-style house with good bones but outdated everything. We spent weekends painting walls, refinishing hardwood floors, and planting a vegetable garden in the backyard. I designed a sunroom addition that we saved for 3 years to build. Alan tracked our investments meticulously, setting financial goals that seemed ambitious but achievable. For the first 7 years, we moved forward steadily. I became an associate at my firm, specializing in sustainable commercial design. Alan switched companies twice, each move bringing a better title and salary. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, and I believed we were happy. The subtle shift began after Alan's 3rd job change. He joined Meridian Financial, a larger company with prestigious clients and significant growth potential. The salary increase was substantial, but so were the expectations. Alan started working longer hours, coming home exhausted but exhilarated by the fast-paced environment. "This is it, Leah," he said one night, loosening his tie as he sank onto the couch beside me. "This is where I can finally make real money." I smiled, happy for his excitement, though something in his tone gave me pause. There was a hunger there I hadn't heard before, an edge that felt new. Within months, his schedule became unpredictable. Dinners were missed, weekend plans canceled. When he was home, his phone demanded constant attention, emails and texts creating an invisible barrier between us. I told myself this was temporary, an adjustment period while he established himself at the new company. Just be patient, I said to my reflection one night as I ate dinner alone again. This is important to him. And then Grandma Rose passed away, quietly in her sleep, leaving behind a legacy I never expected and a void no inheritance could fill. I sat staring at Alan's laptop screen, my heart pounding in my ears. The email was from someone named Emily Winters with the subject line, "Re-closing documents for 42 Lakeside Drive." The preview showed only the first few lines. "Alan, everything is ready for the final signing tomorrow. The sellers accepted your last counteroffer, so we're all set at $875,000. I can't believe we're actually doing this. I've attached the finalized documents that need your signature. Remember to bring certified funds for the—" My hands shook as I clicked to open the full message. More details about the property purchase unfolded before me. Closing costs, inspection reports, utility transfer information. At the bottom of the email was a signature line identifying Emily Winters as a real estate agent with lakefront properties. Had never heard of Emily Winters. I had no knowledge of any property purchase at Lakeside Drive, and I certainly didn't know why my husband was spending $875,000 on a house I'd never seen. For a moment, I wondered if this could be a work-related transaction. Alan managed investments for wealthy clients. Perhaps this was for one of them. But the familiar tone of the email, that "I can't believe we're actually doing this," it suggested something far more personal. I scrolled through the rest of Alan's inbox, my earlier principles about privacy completely abandoned. There were dozens of emails from Emily, dating back nearly 8 months. Some were clearly professional, discussing property values and mortgage options. Others were not. Can't. Wait to see you tonight. I'm missing you already. When can you get away again? Found the perfect spot for our bedroom furniture. You're going to love the view from the master suite. The room tilted around me. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady my breathing, to process what I was seeing. Our bedroom furniture? Our master suite? The pieces were fitting together, forming a picture I couldn't bear to look at but couldn't turn away from either. I clicked on the link to the property listing. 42 Lakeside Drive was a stunning modernist house overlooking Lake Cumberland with floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraparound deck, and expansive grounds. It was exactly the kind of home Alan had always talked about wanting someday. But apparently, someday had arrived, and I wasn't part of the picture. The question that kept echoing in my mind was, how? How could Alan afford an $875,000 house? His salary at Meridian was good, but not nearly enough for a purchase of this magnitude. Even with years of careful saving, we didn't have this kind of money available. Unless I opened a new browser tab and logged into the account that held my inheritance. The main portfolio balance appeared on screen, $1.4 million. The last time I'd checked, just after the transfer from my grandmother's estate, it had been $2.7 million. $1.3 million was missing. My phone buzzed with a text from Alan. Working late. Again. Don't wait up. Love you. I stared at those last 2 words, feeling them mock me. Love you. After 12 years together, after everything we'd built, after the life we'd planned. Those words were now revealed as empty sounds, meaningless syllables he typed out of habit while building a future with someone else. I needed to see it with my own eyes. Needed to know for certain. I pulled up the address on my phone's map app and grabbed my car keys. Lake Cumberland was about 40 minutes outside the city, a quiet, upscale area known for its exclusive properties and privacy. The perfect place to start a new life with a new woman. The drive passed in a blur. Questions pounded through my head, with each mile marker. How long had this been going on? Who was Emily? Did she know about me? Was Alan planning to leave me once the house was finalized, or would he have continued living his double life indefinitely? Lakeside Drive was even more impressive in person. Set back from the road on a wooded lot, the house rose from the landscape, in clean lines of glass and steel, the late afternoon sun reflecting off its windows. A sold sign stood near the driveway, bearing the Lakefront Properties logo and Emily Winter's name and contact information. I parked across the street, uncertain what I was waiting for, what I expected to see. Part of me hoped this was all some terrible misunderstanding, that there was an explanation that wouldn't shatter my world into irreparable pieces. That hope died when a sleek silver car pulled into the driveway. Alan's car. He stepped out, straightening his tie, checking his watch. He looked exactly as he always did. The same man who had kissed me goodbye that morning, who had promised for better or worse on our wedding day. Yet he was a stranger to me now. Moment later, another car arrived. A red BMW convertible driven by a woman with long blonde hair. She parked beside Alan's car and emerged with the confident grace of someone arriving home. Home. That word twisted inside me like a knife. Even. From a distance, I could see she was beautiful. Tall and slim, dressed in an expensive-looking dress that highlighted every curve. She walked straight to Alan, who welcomed her with a kiss that left no doubt about their relationship. I watched as they stood with their arms around each other, admiring the house, their house, purchased with my inheritance. Alan gestured towards the roofline, probably pointing out some architectural feature. The woman, Emily I presumed, nodded enthusiastically, then pulled him in for another kiss. They looked happy. Completely, unreservedly happy. I should have confronted them right. Then, should have marched across the street, demanded answers, made a scene worthy of the betrayal. That's what people do in movies, isn't it? The wronged wife appears dramatically, slaps faces, screams accusations. But I didn't move. Something cold and clear was crystallizing inside me. Not just heartbreak, but resolve. I needed to understand the full extent of what Alan had done before I acted. Needed to know exactly how he had managed to steal nearly half of my inheritance without my knowledge. Because this wasn't just an affair. This was theft. Calculated, deliberate theft. I started the car and drove away before they could see me, my mind already forming a plan. First, I would talk to my grandmother's lawyer. Then I would check every document I'd signed since the inheritance came through. I would follow the money, trace every transaction. Grandma Rose's voice echoed in my memory. The details matter, Leah. Be thorough. I intended to be very thorough indeed. The drive home was a blur. I moved on autopilot, muscle memory guiding me through familiar streets while my mind raced in 1,000 different directions. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the modest home we'd lovingly renovated together, I had made a decision. I wouldn't confront Alan immediately. I would gather evidence, understand the full scope of his betrayal, and then decide my next move. I entered our house, a space that suddenly felt foreign, as if the walls themselves were complicit in Alan's deception. How many times had he sat at our kitchen table, planning his future with Emily while pretending to work late? How many calls had he taken in our bedroom, stepping out to the hallway for privacy while I pretended not to notice? I moved through the rooms methodically, seeing everything through new eyes. The framed wedding photo on the mantel, the collection of seashells from our vacations, the ridiculous ceramic chicken salt and pepper shakers Alan had bought me as a joke gift for our 5th anniversary. All artifacts from a marriage that now seemed like an elaborate fiction. I went to our home office and unlocked the filing cabinet where we kept important documents. With trembling hands, I pulled out the folders related to my inheritance and spread them across the desk. For the next several hours, I reviewed every page, every signature, every transaction record. What I found made me physically ill. 3 months after my grandmother's death, Alan had created a limited liability company called ARW Investments. Alan and Richard Wilson, his college roommate who had gone on to become a corporate attorney. Through a series of complicated legal maneuvers, Alan had transferred a substantial portion of my inheritance into this LLC, ostensibly for investment diversification and tax advantages. I remembered signing the paperwork. Alan had explained it all so logically, using financial terminology just complex enough to sound legitimate without being completely incomprehensible. He'd assured me this was standard practice for managing large inheritances, and I had trusted him completely. What the documents revealed was that Alan had given himself full authority to make investment decisions on behalf of the LLC without requiring my approval. Essentially, he had created a legal mechanism to access my inheritance while maintaining a veneer of propriety. The bank records showed a series of transfers from the LLC to accounts I didn't recognize, culminating in a final withdrawal of $875,000. 2 days earlier, the exact purchase price of 42 Lakeside Drive. But it wasn't just the house. Over the past 8 months, Alan had diverted funds for other expenses: $42,000 to a jeweler I'd never heard of, $18,000 to a luxury travel agency, $27,000 to furniture stores. All gifts for Emily, I presumed. All paid for with my grandmother's legacy. I leaned back in my chair, a strange calm settling over me. The initial shock was giving way to something colder, more focused. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was criminal. Alan had committed fraud, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. He had stolen not just my trust, but my financial security. My phone buzzed with another text from Alan. Meeting running longer than expected. Might need to grab dinner with clients. Sorry. I stared at the message, imagining him sitting across from Emily at some romantic restaurant, both of them laughing about how easy I was to deceive. I typed back a simple response. No problem. Take your time. Let him think I remained oblivious. Let him believe he still had me fooled. The longer he maintained that illusion, the more time I had to plan my response. I called my grandmother's lawyer, Gary Westbrook, hoping he was working late. To my relief, he answered. Leah, is everything all right? His voice was concerned. We hadn't spoken since finalizing the inheritance transfer. I need to meet with you, Gary. Tomorrow, if possible. It's about the inheritance. There are irregularities. A brief pause. What kind of irregularities? I'd rather discuss it in person. But I need your discretion. This can't get back to Alan. Another pause, longer this time. I see. My first appointment tomorrow is at 9:30, but I can see you at 8 if that works. I'll be there. Thank you. After hanging up, I continued my investigation. I checked our joint accounts, credit card statements, even the rarely used safe in our closet where we kept emergency cash and important documents. What I discovered was that Alan had been methodically preparing for his new life for nearly a year. He had opened a separate checking account I knew nothing about. He had applied for a new credit card solely in his name. Most telling of all, I found a folder containing copies of our recent tax returns, property deeds, insurance policies, everything. Someone would need if they were planning to separate their financial life from their spouses. The divorce papers weren't there yet, but I had no doubt they were coming. Once the house closing was complete, once Emily was securely installed in their lakefront dream home, Alan would inform me that our marriage was over. He would express appropriate regret, perhaps blame work stress or claim we had grown apart. He would offer a settlement that appeared generous but would conceal the full extent of what he had already taken. And he would expect me to accept it quietly, to walk away with dignity rather than fight and risk public embarrassment. After all, wasn't that what I had always done? Accepted his excuses, accommodated his ambitions, supported his dreams even when they took him away from me? The realization of how thoroughly he had planned his betrayal, how confident he was in my predictable response, ignited something in me I hadn't felt before. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that. Something more powerful, a determination that Alan would not succeed, that he would not simply walk away from our marriage with half my inheritance and a new life. I spent the rest of the evening creating my own documentation, copying files, photographing documents, making notes of dates and amounts. By midnight, I had compiled enough evidence to prove that Alan had systematically defrauded me. When I finally heard his key in the lock at 1:30 a.m., I was waiting in bed, pretending to be asleep. He entered quietly, undressed in the dark, and slipped under the covers. I felt the bed dip with his weight, smelled unfamiliar perfume on his skin. He didn't touch me, maintaining the careful distance that had become our normal over the past months. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into sleep, the untroubled rest of a man who believed his plans were proceeding perfectly. I lay awake beside him, the stranger I had married, and made a silent promise to my grandmother. Her legacy would not fund my husband's betrayal. Whatever it took, I would reclaim what was mine. Morning arrived with pale light filtering through the curtains. I rose early, showered, and dressed with particular care. A tailored charcoal suit I usually reserved for important client meetings, pearl earrings that had belonged to Grandma Rose, subtle makeup that concealed my sleepless night. Alan was still asleep when I left, his face relaxed and boyish in repose. I resisted the urge to wake him, to confront him then and there. Timing was everything now. I needed legal advice before I made my next move. As I drove to Gary Westbrook's office, I rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain the elaborate deception my husband had constructed. But another question kept intruding. How had I missed this? How had I failed to see the man I married for what he truly was? Perhaps the answer lay in what Grandma Rose had tried to tell me years ago. Always maintain your independence. In my desire for partnership, for the security of shared dreams, I had surrendered my vigilance. I had abdicated responsibility for my own financial well-being, believing that love made such caution unnecessary. It was a mistake I would never make again. Gary Westbrook's office was housed in an elegant Victorian converted to professional space near the city center. I'd been here several times with Grandma Rose over the years, and then for the inheritance proceedings. The familiar environment provided a small measure of comfort on this most unsettling morning. Gary himself was waiting in the reception area. When I arrived, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. In his mid-60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he had been my grandmother's lawyer and friend for over 30 years. "Leah," he said, his expression concerned. "Come in." He led me to his office, closing the door firmly behind us. I sat across from his imposing mahogany desk, clutching my folder of evidence. "You look like you haven't slept," he observed, settling into his chair. "Tell me what's happening." I took a deep breath and told him everything. The discovery of the email, the house at Lake Cumberland, the financial trail I'd uncovered. As I spoke, Gary's expression shifted from concern to disbelief to cold anger. "I knew your grandmother for most of my adult life," he said when I finished. "She valued two things above all others: honesty and loyalty. What Alan has done betrays both." He removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I want my money back," I said simply. "All of it." Gary nodded. "The good news is that the transfer of assets from your inheritance to the LLC creates a clear paper trail. Alan may have been clever, but he couldn't completely hide the movement of funds. The bad news is that confronting this legally means confronting it publicly, divorce proceedings, possibly criminal charges for fraud. I hadn't considered the criminal aspect fully. The thought of Alan facing legal consequences should have brought satisfaction, but instead, it left me hollow. Despite everything, some part of me still struggled to reconcile the man I had loved with the person who could steal so methodically from me. "What would Grandma Rose do?" I asked, a small smile touching my lips despite everything. Gary chuckled. Rose would go for the jugular, but she'd do it strategically. She never made a move without considering all possible outcomes. That was true. My grandmother had built her real estate empire through careful planning and impeccable timing. She never acted from pure emotion, no matter how justified. I need time to think, I said. To plan. But I also need to protect what's left of my inheritance before Alan takes that too. Gary nodded. We can file for emergency financial restraining. Orders today. That will freeze the LLC assets and any joint accounts. It won't get back what's already been spent, but it will prevent further withdrawals. Do it, I said without hesitation. Leah, Gary's voice softened. Have you told anyone else about this? Your father? Friends? You shouldn't be facing this alone. I shook my head. Not yet. Dad would be devastated. He really liked Alan, and honestly, I'm still processing it myself. Call your father, Gary advised. You'll need support through this, and consider this. He slid a business card across the desk. Helen Ramirez. She's the best divorce attorney in the state. Tough as nails, but completely ethical. If anyone can help you recover what Alan took, it's Helen. I took the card, running my fingers over the embossed lettering. Divorce. The word made it real in a way even the evidence hadn't. Thank you, I managed, tucking the card into my wallet. For everything. Rose would be proud of your strength, Gary said, squeezing my hand briefly, and furious about what happened. Let's make sure her legacy ends up where she intended. After leaving Gary's office, I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering my thoughts. The legal wheels were now in motion. By afternoon, Alan would discover. He could no longer access the LLC funds. That would force his hand, make him realize his careful plans had been discovered. I needed to prepare for that confrontation. But first, I needed to talk to my father. Dad lived about 30 minutes outside the city, in the same house where I'd grown up. After my mother left, he had thrown himself into making our home a haven of stability and warmth. He never remarried, joking that teaching chemistry to teenagers left him with no energy for dating. He answered on the second ring. Leah, what a nice surprise. Calling to check if your old man remembered to eat breakfast? His cheerful voice nearly broke me. Dad, I managed, my voice cracking. I need to see you, today, if possible. His tone changed immediately. What's wrong? Are you hurt? I'm not hurt. At least not physically. But something's happened, and I just need my dad right now. Come home, he said simply. I'll be here. 30 minutes later, I was sitting at his kitchen table, the same one where I'd done homework, celebrated birthdays, and shared countless meals. The house smelled of coffee and the sourdough bread Dad had taken up baking since his retirement last year. I told him everything, watching his expressive face cycle through shock, disbelief, and finally, a quiet rage I'd rarely seen from my gentle father. That son of a... He cut himself off, taking a deep breath. Sorry, but Leah, this is... I'm struggling to understand how Alan could do this. To you, of all people. That's the part I keep coming back to, I admitted. Was our entire marriage a lie? Did he ever love me at all? Dad reached across the table, covering my hand with his. I don't have those answers. But I do know this. You didn't deserve any of this. And you won't face it alone. Tears filled my eyes. I feel so stupid, Dad. All those late nights, the business trips, the secretive phone calls. The signs were all there. How did I miss them? Because you trusted your husband, which is what you're supposed to do in a marriage. His voice was firm. Alan's betrayal is not your failure, Leah. It's his. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything settling between us. Finally, Dad pushed back his chair. You're staying here tonight, he announced. I'll make up your old room. You shouldn't be alone when you confront him. I haven't decided when to do that, I admitted. The financial restraining orders will force his hand. Dad pointed out, practical as always. He'll know something's up as soon as they take effect. Better to control the situation than let him ambush you. He was right, of course. The thought of returning to the house, of pretending even for one more night that nothing had changed, was unbearable. I need to get some things, I said. Clothes, important documents, things I don't want to lose if this gets ugly. Dad nodded. I'll come with you. We'll go when you're ready. The offer brought fresh tears to my eyes. Even now, at 35, there was comfort in knowing my father would stand beside me, a buffer against the storm ahead. There's something else, I said, wiping my eyes. Something I haven't told you yet. Dad waited patiently as I collected myself. The house Alan bought, the one at Lake Cumberland, closes tomorrow. $875,000 of my inheritance, gone in an instant. And there's nothing I can do to stop it. Dad considered this, his chemistry teacher's mind clearly working through the problem. Maybe not, he said slowly. But there might be something we can do after. What do you mean? A small, uncharacteristically mischievous smile crossed his face. Your grandmother didn't just teach you about money, Leah. She taught me a few things too. About property, contracts, and the importance of reading the fine print. For the first time since discovering Alan's betrayal, I felt a flicker of hope. Whatever Dad was thinking, it reminded me of something essential. I wasn't facing this alone. I had support, not just from him, but from Gary, and from the legacy of strength my grandmother had left me. Whatever Alan had planned, whatever he thought he knew about me and how I would react, he was about to discover he'd underestimated not just me, but the people who truly loved me. Dad and I spent the rest of the morning strategizing. We made lists of items I needed to retrieve from the house, documents to secure, accounts to protect. Around noon, I received a text from Gary confirming that the emergency financial restraining orders had been filed and would take effect by 3 p.m. The clock was ticking. We should go now, Dad suggested. While Alan's still at work, get what you need without confrontation. I nodded, though part of me wanted the confrontation, wanted to see Alan's face when he realized his carefully constructed plan was crumbling. But Dad was right. This wasn't about emotional satisfaction. It was about protecting myself and what remained of my inheritance. The drive to my house, the home I had shared with Alan for nearly a decade, felt surreal. Spring flowers bloomed in the front yard I had so carefully planted. The blue front door, which I had insisted on painting myself despite Alan's suggestion to hire professionals, still looked cheerful and welcoming. Everything appeared exactly as it had yesterday, yet everything had changed. Dad followed me inside, his presence reassuring as I moved through rooms that now felt contaminated by deception. I packed methodically. Clothes, jewelry, important documents. The few family heirlooms Grandma Rose had left me that weren't part of the formal inheritance. I took my personal laptop, but left the desktop computer Alan and I shared, after copying key files to a secure drive, of course. As I worked, memories surfaced unbidden. Alan helping me hang curtains in the living room, the dinner party we'd hosted when I made partner at my firm, lazy Sunday mornings reading the paper together at the kitchen table. Had it all been a performance? Were there moments of genuine connection, or had I imagined them? I paused in our bedroom, staring at the king-sized bed we'd splurged on for our 5th anniversary. How many nights had I lain there beside him, believing we were building a future together, while he was dreaming of a life with Emily? Leah? Dad's voice brought me back to the present. Are you okay? I nodded, forcing myself to continue packing. I'm fine, just processing. Take your time, he said gently. But we probably shouldn't linger too long. He was right again. I finished packing, then took one final walk through the house, saying goodbye to the life I had believed in so completely. In the home office, I paused at the wall of framed photographs, our wedding, vacations, casual moments captured through the years. I removed one, a picture of me with Grandma Rose on her 80th birthday, and left the rest. Let Alan live with those memories on the wall. Let him face the evidence of what he had thrown away. As we prepared to leave, I noticed the light blinking. On our landline answering machine, a relic we kept primarily for work calls, I pressed play out of habit. "This message is for Alan Wilson," a woman's crisp voice announced. "This is Dr. Reynolds' office confirming your appointment tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. Please remember to bring your previous test results as discussed. If you need to reschedule, please call us as soon as possible." I frowned, looking at Dad. Alan never mentioned any doctor's appointments. "Probably nothing," Dad said, though his expression was thoughtful. "More deception, more lies." I nodded, following him out to the car. We had just loaded the last of my bags when my phone rang. Alan's name flashed on the screen. "It's him," I said, showing Dad. "Are you ready to talk to him?" I took a deep breath. "Not yet. Not like this." I declined the call, but seconds later, a text appeared. What the hell is going on? Why can't I access the LLC accounts? So the financial restraining orders had taken effect. Alan knew something was wrong, but he didn't yet understand the extent of my discovery. I turned off my phone, needing time to prepare before engaging with him directly. Dad and I drove back to his house in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As we unloaded my belongings, arranging them in my childhood bedroom, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place: the doctor's appointment message. "Dad," I said slowly, "what if Alan is sick? What if there's some medical reason for his behavior?" The ray thought had appeared from nowhere, but once present, I couldn't dismiss it. What if this wasn't just about greed and betrayal? What if something more complex was happening? Dad considered this, ever the scientist looking at all possibilities. "It's unlikely, but not impossible. Some medical conditions can affect judgment, personality. But Leah, that wouldn't explain the systematic financial manipulation. That took planning, intention." I nodded, acknowledging the truth in his words. Yet the message nagged at me. Dr. Reynolds, previous test results. It was one more unexplained element in an already complicated situation. After settling in at Dad's house, I finally turned my phone back on. 6 missed calls from Alan, 3 voicemails, and a dozen increasingly frantic texts. The most recent, read: "Leah, whatever you think is happening, you're wrong. We need to talk. Please call me back." I didn't call. Instead, I texted, "I know about Emily. I know about the house at Lake Cumberland. I know everything, Alan." His response was immediate. "I can explain. It's not what you think." The classic line of every caught cheater. I turned my phone off again, not willing to engage with his attempts at manipulation. That evening, Dad and I shared a simple dinner, reminiscing about Grandma Rose and her practical wisdom. The conversation was a balm to my wounded spirit, reminding me that while Alan's love may have been an illusion, my family's love was real and enduring. As we cleared the dishes, Dad mentioned something that had been bothering him. That doctor's message, Dr. Reynolds. It sounded familiar, but I couldn't place why. Then I remembered. Robert Reynolds is an oncologist at University Hospital. He specializes in aggressive forms of cancer. My heart stuttered. Cancer? You think Alan has cancer? Dad shook his head. I'm not saying that. Just making the connection. It could be a different Dr. Reynolds, or Alan could be seeing an oncologist for any number of reasons. But the seed was planted. What if Alan was facing a serious illness? Would that explain, if not excuse, his desperate actions? The thought kept me awake long into the night, memories of our life together playing on endless loop. The next morning, after a fitful sleep, I met with Helen Ramirez, the divorce attorney Gary had recommended. Her office was sleek and modern, her manner direct and uncompromising. "The financial restraining orders were a good first step," she said after reviewing my documents. "But recovering the money already spent will be challenging. The house closing, for example, that transaction may be complete before we can intervene." "What are my options?" I asked. "Legally?" "We file for divorce immediately, citing fraud and financial misconduct. We go after not just what's left of your inheritance, but compensation for what was taken. Potentially, we pursue criminal charges." She paused, studying my face. "But there's something holding you back. What is it?" I hesitated, then mentioned the doctor's message, my suspicion that Alan might be ill. Helen's expression softened slightly. "If that's true, it would be relevant to understanding his actions. But it wouldn't necessarily change the legal approach. Your inheritance is still your inheritance, regardless of his health status." "I know," I said. I need to understand why, before I proceed with anything irrevocable." Helen nodded. "That's fair. But be careful, Leah. Men like your husband, men who systematically deceive those closest to them, they're very good at creating sympathy, at manipulating emotions." Her warning was timely. Just as we were concluding our meeting, my phone lit up with a text from Alan. "I'm coming to your father's house. We need to talk. There are things you don't understand." I showed Helen the message. She frowned. "Are you ready to confront him?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I don't think I have a choice anymore." "Remember," Helen said, walking me to the door, "whatever explanation he offers, whatever justification he presents, the facts remain. He took your money without your informed consent. He betrayed your trust. Keep those truths at the center of any conversation." I nodded, grateful for her clarity. As I drove back to Dad's house, I tried to prepare myself for what was coming. What could Alan possibly say that would explain away what he had done? What revelation could make sense of such systematic betrayal? Was about to find out. I arrived at Dad's house to find Alan already waiting in the driveway, leaning against his car. He straightened when he saw me pull up, his expression a mix of anxiety and relief. He looked terrible, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as I had. "Leah," he said as I got out of my car, taking a step toward me. "Thank God. You've had me worried sick." I kept my distance, keys clutched in my hand like a weapon. "Worried that your plans were falling apart?" His face fell. "Please, can we talk inside? There are things you need to know, things I should have told you months ago. Like the fact that you're having an affair with Emily Winters? Or that you stole $1.3 million of my inheritance to buy her a house?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but the sight of him, so familiar yet now so foreign, had unleashed emotions I'd been trying to control. Alan flinched. "Emily isn't... It's not what you think. I saw you with her, Alan. At the house. I saw how you looked at her, how you kissed her. Don't insult me by denying it." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. Now it just seemed like another performance. "Yes, I've been seeing Emily. And yes, I used money from the inheritance for the house. But the reasons aren't what you think." Before I could respond, the front door opened and Dad appeared. His expression was controlled, but I could see the tension in his stance, the barely restrained anger. "We can talk inside," I said to Alan, not wanting to create a scene in the driveway. "But I'm not interested in excuses." Dad stepped aside as we entered, his gaze never leaving Alan. "I'll be in the kitchen," he said to me. "Call if you need me." Alan and I moved to the living room, positioning ourselves on opposite ends of the couch. The physical distance between us a fitting reflection of the emotional chasm that had opened. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, marking seconds that stretched into eternity. "I'm sick, Leah," Alan finally said, his voice quiet and steady. "I have pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and devastating. I stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception, finding only exhaustion and what looked like genuine pain. "Dr. Reynolds," I said, remembering the message. "The oncologist." Alan nodded. "I was diagnosed 8 months ago. The prognosis isn't good. 6 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment." I felt the room tilt around me, my carefully constructed narrative of betrayal suddenly complicated by this new information. "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked down, studying his hands. I couldn't. At first, I was in shock, couldn't process it myself. Then, "I didn't want to burden you. You were so happy, so focused on your career. And I started making decisions I'm not proud of. Like stealing my inheritance." The words came out harsher than I intended, but the hurt was still raw, the betrayal still real regardless of his health. Alan winced. "I know how it looks, but Leah, I wasn't thinking clearly. The diagnosis, it changed something in me, made me desperate. I started thinking about what would happen after I was gone, about what legacy I would leave." I shook my head, pieces still, not fitting together. "So you decided to have an affair and buy a house for your girlfriend? That's your legacy?" "Emily isn't my girlfriend," Alan said, meeting my eyes directly for the first time since we'd sat down. "She's my sister." The statement was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't process it. "Your sister? You don't have a sister. You have 2 brothers, Gary and Nathan." "Half-sister," Alan clarified. "My father's daughter from the affair that ended his marriage to my mother. Emily was born a year after he left us." I stared at him, trying to reconcile this new information with everything I thought I knew about my husband. "You never mentioned her, not once in 12 years. "Because I didn't know about her until last year," Alan said, his voice strained. "She found me after our father died. She'd been trying to locate his children, to understand the family he'd abandoned. We met for coffee just once at first. She was so much like him. The same mannerisms, the same laugh. It was unsettling." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Then came my diagnosis, and suddenly connecting with her felt urgent, necessary. She was the one person who shared my blood, who could understand what it meant to be abandoned by our father. We started spending more time together, trying to build some kind of relationship before—" He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. "The house?" I asked, my voice softened despite my lingering anger. Alan's expression shifted, a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Emily grew up with nothing. Our father never paid child support, never acknowledged her. Her mother struggled, working multiple jobs just to keep them housed. Emily fought for everything she has, put herself through college, built a career in real estate, but she's always lived paycheck to paycheck." He leaned forward, hands clasped tightly together. "When I found out I was dying, I started thinking about what matters, about making things right. I wanted to leave Emily something tangible, something that would give her security. The house at Lake Cumberland, it was my attempt at correcting our father's wrongs." The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture both more understandable and more complex than the simple betrayal I had imagined. Yet critical questions remained unanswered. Why the secrecy, Alan? Why not tell me? About Emily, about your diagnosis? We could have faced this together. We could have found a way to help her that didn't involve deception. I tried, Leah. God knows I tried. But every time I started to tell you about the cancer, I couldn't form the words. Saying it out loud to you would make it real in a way I wasn't ready to face. And then as time passed, the lie grew bigger. The longer I waited, the harder it became to tell the truth. And my inheritance? Did you think I wouldn't notice $1.3 million missing? His expression crumpled. I convinced myself it was temporary, that I'd replace it with my life insurance payout after I was gone. The policy is for $2 million. I changed the beneficiary designation to make you the primary recipient, with instructions to pay back the inheritance funds first. I felt a surge of anger. You had no right to make that decision, Alan. That was my inheritance, my grandmother's legacy to me. I know, he whispered, his voice breaking. I know that now. But at the time, all I could think about was Emily, about making sure she was taken care of. It became an obsession, this need to right my father's wrongs before I died. I've been making decisions from a place of fear, of desperation. Not justifying it, just trying to explain. We sat in silence for several moments, the enormity of his revelations settling between us. His illness changed the nature of his actions, but didn't erase them. The betrayal was still real, the breach of trust still profound. Yet now there was something else too. The awareness that the man I had loved was facing his own mortality in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. The house closes today, I said finally. It's too late to stop that. Alan nodded. I'm sorry, Leah. Truly. I'll find a way to make this right, whatever time I have left. And Emily, does she know about me? About where the money for her house really came from? His hesitation told me everything. She knows I'm married, but she doesn't know about the inheritance or how I obtained the funds. She believes I've been successful in investments, that I have money of my own. So your deception extends to her as well, I observed quietly. Alan didn't deny it. I wanted to be her hero, the brother who swooped in to save her when our father never did. It's pathetic. I know, selfish even. I stood up, needing physical distance, needing to think. I need time to process all this, Alan. The cancer. I'm sorry, truly. But it doesn't erase what you did. I know, he said simply. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to understand. As he rose to leave, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a thick envelope. My medical records, test results, everything you need to verify what I've told you. And this. He produced a second, thinner envelope. The paperwork for the life insurance policy. It's legitimate, Leah. The money will come back to you. I accepted the envelopes without comment, watching as he moved toward the door. He paused, at the threshold, turning back to me with an expression of profound regret. I've handled everything wrong, made choices I can't defend. But Leah, meeting Emily, connecting with her, it's the one good thing to come from this diagnosis. I wish I'd found a way to make you part of it instead of shutting you out. After he left, I stood in the silent living room, the envelopes heavy in my hands. Dad appeared in the doorway, his expression concerned. You heard? I asked. He nodded. Most of it. The walls in this house have always been thin. Do you believe him? About the cancer? Dad sighed. People rarely lie about dying, Leah. But the only way to know for sure is to check those records. I looked down at the envelopes, the physical evidence of a truth I wasn't prepared to face. Whatever came next, I knew one thing with certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again. That evening, I sat at Dad's kitchen table, medical records spread before me. The documentation was comprehensive and, to my untrained eye, appeared authentic. CT scans, blood work, oncology reports, treatment plans, all confirmed Alan's diagnosis: stage 4 pancreatic cancer, metastasized to the liver. The prognosis was exactly as he'd stated: 6 months to a year with aggressive treatment. It's real, I said to Dad, who had been examining the reports with the methodical attention of a scientist. He's actually dying. Dad nodded gravely. These are legitimate medical records. And pancreatic cancer at this stage. It's one of the most aggressive forms. I leaned back in my chair, overcome by conflicting emotions. Anger at Alan's betrayal remained. But now it was tangled with grief for the husband I was going to lose, compassion for the suffering he was enduring alone, and confusion about what to do next. This doesn't change what he did, I said, as much to convince myself as Dad. He still stole my inheritance. He still lied to me for months. No, it doesn't change that, Dad agreed. But it might help explain it. Fear does strange things to people, Leah. Makes them desperate, irrational. I thought about Alan's explanation, his newfound half-sister, his desire to right his father's wrongs before he died. It was almost understandable when viewed through the lens of his diagnosis. Almost, but not quite. I need to meet her, I decided. Emily, I need to see for myself if she's really his sister, if this whole story is true. Dad raised an eyebrow. Are you sure that's wise? You're still processing all of this. I need to know the whole truth, Dad. Every piece of it. Before I decide what to do next. After a moment, he nodded. I understand. But be careful. Remember what your attorney said about manipulation. The next morning, I called Helen Ramirez to update her on the situation. She listened without interruption as I explained Alan's diagnosis and his relationship with Emily. The cancer changes things emotionally, she acknowledged when I finished. But legally, it doesn't erase the fraud. He still took your money without proper consent, regardless of his intentions. I know, I said. But I'm not sure I want to pursue divorce or criminal charges against a dying man. That feels cruel. Helen's voice softened slightly. Leah, think of it this way. You can be compassionate without being a doormat. There are legal mechanisms to recover your funds while still showing humanity. Such as a postnuptial agreement outlining repayment terms, a legal claim against the life insurance proceeds, documentation ensuring the Lake Cumberland property reverts to you after his death. We can structure arrangements that protect your interests without adding unnecessary suffering to his final months. It was a balanced approach that resonated with me. I want to meet Emily first, I told her. Verify Alan's story before making any decisions. That's fair, Helen agreed. Just remember, if she is his half-sister, she may be an innocent party in all this. She might have no idea where the money for her house really came from. After ending the call, I texted Alan. I need Emily's contact information. I want to meet her. His reply came quickly. Are you sure about this? Yes. I need to see for myself. There was a long pause before his next message. I'll ask if she's willing. But Leah, please don't tell her about the inheritance. Let me be the one to explain what I've done. I didn't respond to that request. I wasn't sure yet what I would say to Emily, what truths needed to be shared. Later that afternoon, Alan sent Emily's phone number. I waited until evening to call, rehearsing what I would say, how I would approach this strange and painful conversation. Emily answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. Hello? Emily, this is Leah Wilson, Alan's wife. A beat of silence. Oh, I wasn't expecting your call. I imagine not, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I'd like to meet with you. Tomorrow. If possible, another pause. Does Alan know you're calling me? He gave me your number. But this isn't about Alan. It's about you and me having an honest conversation. I see. Her voice was guarded now. I suppose we should talk. There's a cafe near my office. Bluegrass. Brewing on Main Street. I could meet you there at noon? We confirmed the details, and I ended the call feeling both nervous and resolved. Tomorrow, I would meet the woman who had become so important to my husband that he had risked everything. Our marriage, his integrity, my trust, to provide for her. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with questions. Was Emily truly Alan's half-sister? Did she resemble him? Was their connection genuine? Or was she manipulating a dying man? And most troubling of all, what would I do if Alan's story proved true? How would I balance protecting my inheritance with compassion for his final wishes? The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, selecting a table in the corner that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. At precisely noon, a woman entered, tall, blonde, and undeniably beautiful. She scanned the room, and I raised my hand slightly to catch her attention. As she approached, I studied her face, looking for traces of Alan. There was something familiar in the shape of her eyes, the angle of her jaw. Small similarities that might suggest shared genetics, or might be my imagination reaching for connections. "Leah," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for meeting me." Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. She didn't seem nervous or guilty, just cautiously reserved. "I ordered coffee," I said, gesturing to the carafe on the table. "I hope that's all right." She nodded, taking the seat across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke, each taking the measure of the other. "Alan told me about the cancer," I finally said, deciding directness was the only approach that made sense. "And about you being his half-sister." Emily's expression softened, with genuine concern. "How are you handling the news? It must have been a shock." Her question surprised me. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps even hostility, not empathy for my situation. It was, I admitted. Especially since he kept it from me for 8 months. She frowned. 8 months? But he was diagnosed almost a year ago. The discrepancy was small but significant. "That's not what he told me." Emily looked confused. "That's strange. We met for the first time last April, and he told me about his diagnosis during our second meeting in May. He said he'd just received confirmation after weeks of tests. May of last year, nearly 11 months ago, not 8. Another lie, or at least another distortion of the truth. What else had Alan altered in his narrative? "Tell me how you found him," I said, shifting the conversation. Emily poured herself coffee, adding a splash of cream before responding. "After our father died, I received a small package of his personal effects. Just some cufflinks, his watch, a few photographs. There was a picture of him with 3 young boys. On the back, he'd written, 'My sons, 1992. I'd always known he had another family before me, but seeing that photo made them real." She took a sip of coffee, her gaze distant. "I hired a private investigator who tracked down Alan first. I was nervous about making contact, afraid of rejection, I guess. But Alan was kind. Shocked, but kind." "And your relationship developed from there?" She nodded. "Slowly at first, just coffee every few weeks. Then after his diagnosis, things accelerated. He became almost desperate to make up for lost time, to create a connection." Her description matched what Alan had told me, lending credibility to his explanation. But it still didn't justify his actions regarding my inheritance. "Emily," I said carefully, "did Alan tell you how he was financing your new house?" Her expression brightened. "He's been incredibly generous. He said his investments had done well, that he wanted to do this for me while he still could." Her smile faltered. I resisted at first. It felt like too much. But he was so insistent, so determined, to help me achieve financial security before— She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Before he died. The unspoken words hung between us. "Do you know much about our financial situation? Alan's and mine?" Emily looked uncomfortable. "Not specifically, no. I know you're an architect, that you both have good careers. Alan mentioned his work in finance has been lucrative." I nodded slowly, realizing she truly didn't know. "Did Alan ever mention my grandmother, or an inheritance I received recently?" No, she said, her confusion evident. He hasn't talked much about your family. Is there something I should know? I hesitated, torn between revealing the truth and honoring Alan's request to let him explain his actions to Emily. Before I could decide, Emily's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it, her expression shifting to alarm. "It's Alan," she said. "He's been admitted to the hospital. Something about complications from his last treatment." My heart raced. Despite everything, the thought of Alan suffering alone in a hospital room was unbearable. "Which hospital?" I asked, already reaching for my purse. "Memorial. He says not to worry, that it's just precautionary, but—" I met her eyes, seeing my own concern reflected there. "We should go." As we left the cafe together, I realized the conversation I had planned, the confrontation about money, about truth, would have to wait. Right now, Alan needed us both, and I needed to see him, to understand what this diagnosis really meant, for his future. For our future, however complicated that had become. Whatever decisions awaited me regarding the inheritance, the house, my marriage, they would have to be made with the full awareness that I was not just dealing with a man who had betrayed me, but a man who was running out of time. Emily and I drove to Memorial Hospital in separate cars, both rushing through midday traffic with the same urgency. My mind raced with conflicting thoughts, concern for Alan's condition, lingering anger over his deception, and new questions raised by the discrepancies in his story. The hospital's antiseptic smell hit me as I entered the emergency department. That distinctive blend of cleaning products and medical supplies that always made my stomach tighten. Emily arrived moments after I did, slightly breathless from hurrying. "He's in room 114, she said, checking her phone. "The nurse told me we can go right in." We walked together down the sterile corridor, an unlikely pair united by our connection to the same man. When we reached Alan's room, I hesitated, suddenly unsure what I would say, how I would react to seeing him in a hospital bed. Emily touched my arm lightly. "Are you okay?" I nodded, gathering my composure. "Let's go in." Alan was lying back against the raised bed, an IV inserted in his arm, his face pale but alert. He looked startled to see us together, his gaze darting between Emily and me as we entered the room. "What happened?" Emily asked, moving to his bedside. "Dehydration from the chemo," he explained, his voice weaker than I'd expected. "And my blood counts are dangerously low. They want to keep me overnight for fluids and monitoring." His eyes found mine, questioning. I remained at the foot of the bed, not ready to offer the comfort of proximity. "You two have met," he said. Not a question, but a concerned observation. "We were having coffee when you texted," Emily explained. "Getting to know each other." Alan's expression tightened. "What did you talk about?" The question revealed his anxiety, his fear of what truths might have been shared. I decided directness was the only approach. "Emily doesn't know about my inheritance, Alan, or that you used it to buy her house." Emily turned to him, confusion clear on her face. "What is she talking about?" Alan closed his eyes briefly, exhaustion and resignation visible in every line of his body. When he opened them again, he looked directly at his half-sister. "The money for your house didn't come from my investments, Emily. It came from Leah's inheritance from her grandmother. I took it without her full knowledge or consent." The room fell silent as Emily processed this revelation. I watched her face transition from confusion to shock to dismay. "You stole from your wife to buy me a house?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was going to replace it," Alan said, desperation edging his words. "My life insurance—" "That doesn't make it right," Emily interrupted, stepping back from the bed. "I would never have accepted if I'd known. Never." She turned to me, genuine distress in her eyes. "Leah, I had no idea. You have to believe me. I would never participate in something like this." "I believe you," I said, recognizing the authenticity of her shock. This is between Alan and me. Alan looked from Emily to me, the facade completely crumbled now. I thought I was doing the right thing, taking care of my sister, making sure she'd be secure after I was gone. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving. Nothing behind. No positive legacy. So you decided to sacrifice my trust, my financial security for this legacy. I moved closer to the bed now, needing him to see the pain his choices had caused. Did you ever consider what that would do to me? Alan's gaze dropped to his hands, unable to meet my eyes. I told myself you'd understand eventually, that once I was gone, you'd see why I had done it, and the life insurance would make it right. There is no making this right, Alan, I said, my voice low but firm. Not with money, not with explanations. Emily stood awkwardly at the side of the room, clearly torn between loyalty to her newfound brother and horror at what he had done. I can't accept the house, she said finally. Not like this. We'll need to sell it, return the money to Leah. Alan looked stricken. No, Emily, please. This was for you. It was never yours to give, she cut in, a quiet dignity in her posture. I've managed on my own all my life. I don't need to start over with stolen money. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt a glimmer of respect for Alan's half-sister. She had principles, a moral compass that seemed stronger than his own. A nurse entered the room, clipboard in hand. I need to check Mr. Wilson's vitals, she announced, glancing between us. Perhaps you ladies could step out for a moment? Emily nodded, moving toward the door. I hesitated, still having so much to say, so many questions unanswered. We'll continue this conversation later, I told Alan, my tone making it clear this wasn't over. He nodded weakly, seeming to age before my eyes. Leah, he called as I reached the door. There's something else you need to know. About the life insurance policy. The nurse looked up from checking his blood pressure. Sir, you really need to rest. It's important, Alan insisted, his gaze fixed on me. The carrier denied my claim last week. Pre-existing condition exclusion. The policy won't pay out when I die. The revelation about the life insurance hit me like a physical blow. The $2 million policy, Alan's supposed solution, his plan to make amends, was worthless. There would be no financial redemption, no restoration of my inheritance after his death. The theft was permanent, the loss final. I left the hospital in, a daze, barely registering Emily's words as she walked me to my car. I'll contact a real estate agent tomorrow, she said, her voice gentle but determined. We'll list the house immediately. I don't know how much we can recover in a quick sale, but whatever it is, it's yours. I nodded mechanically, unable to form a coherent response. The house was worth $875,000, but a distressed sale would likely yield considerably less. And what about the rest of the missing money? The jewelry, the furniture, the travel, all those expenditures that couldn't be recouped. Instead of driving directly back to Dad's house, I found myself pulling into a park near the hospital, a quiet space with a small lake where Alan and I had sometimes strolled on Sunday afternoons in happier times. I sat on a bench overlooking the water, watching a family pass by, mother, father, and a little girl whose laughter carried across the park. Once I had imagined such a scene in my own future. Now that future was gone, not just because of Alan's betrayal, but because of his illness. I called Helen Ramirez, giving her a concise summary of everything that had happened. She was silent for a moment, processing this new information. This complicates things, she finally said. Without the insurance payout, recovery options are limited. We can place a lien against any assets in Alan's name, but from what you've described, there's not much there. And the house? I asked. If Emily agrees to sell it voluntarily, that simplifies matters. But you should be prepared. A rushed sale will likely result in less than full market value. I closed my eyes, exhaustion washing over me. What would you do, Helen, if you were in my position? She sighed, abandoning her professional reserve for a moment. Honestly, I'd secure what I could through legal means, then try to find a way to make peace with the rest. Not for Alan's sake, but for mine. Carrying anger through grief, it's a heavy burden. When I finally returned to Dad's house, he was waiting with dinner, a simple meal of pasta and salad, comfort food from my childhood. I spoke with Sheila. Wilson today, he said as we cleared the dishes afterward. Alan's mother. I nearly dropped the plate I was rinsing. You called Alan's mother? Why? I wanted to understand the family situation better. Context matters, Leah. And what did you learn? I asked. Sheila confirmed that Alan's father left them for another woman, Emily's mother. She also mentioned something interesting. Alan's father died of pancreatic cancer too, at roughly the same age Alan is now. The coincidence sent a chill through me. Genetic predisposition? Dad nodded. Possibly. Sheila said Alan watched his father deteriorate rapidly at the end. It was traumatic for him. So when Alan received his own diagnosis, it must have triggered profound fear, Dad finished. Not just of death, but of a specific kind of death he had witnessed firsthand. There's something else, Dad continued. Alan's father had a substantial life insurance policy, one that paid out despite his illness. Sheila wasn't sure of the details, but she remembered it covered them financially after his death. I frowned. But Alan said his policy was denied. Because of his pre-existing condition. Exactly, Dad said. That caught my attention too. It seems odd that the father's policy would pay out under similar circumstances, but Alan's wouldn't. A new suspicion formed in my mind. Dad, do you still have that contact at the Insurance Regulatory Commission? The one who helped with your retirement planning? He nodded. Nathan Brooks. We play golf occasionally. Why? I need to check something, I said, a plan forming. Something about life insurance policies and denial of claims. That night, I couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts, too many emotions, too many unresolved questions. But among them all, one stood out with surprising clarity. I needed to know the truth about that life insurance policy. Because if Alan had lied about that too, if there was actually a policy that would pay out, it changed everything. The next morning, I met with Nathan Brooks, Dad's contact at the Insurance Regulatory Commission. Over coffee, he explained the basics of life insurance policies. Most policies have a 2-year contestability period, he said. After that, they generally have to pay out even if there was a pre-existing condition, as long as premiums were kept current. What about a policy taken out after a diagnosis? I asked. No reputable company would issue a standard policy to someone with a terminal diagnosis. And if someone took out a policy before their diagnosis? A later diagnosis shouldn't impact coverage. That's the whole point of life insurance, to protect against future uncertainties. Armed with this knowledge, I returned home and examined the policy documentation Alan had given me. Curiously, there was no official denial letter from the insurance company. I called the carrier directly, identified myself as Alan's spouse, and provided his policy number. After verifying my identity, the representative confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Yes, Mrs. Wilson, the policy is in good standing. There are no issues with the coverage. So the claim hasn't been denied? I asked, my heart pounding. There hasn't been any claim submitted for this policy, she replied, sounding confused. Did you want to discuss filing a claim? No, thank you, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Just confirming the status. I hung up, stunned by the confirmation of my suspicion. Alan had lied about the insurance being denied. The $2 million policy was valid. He had created an elaborate deception about the denial, presumably to make me believe there was no way to recover my inheritance. But why? What possible reason could he have for lying about this? The answer came to me in a flash of clarity. Emily. If Alan died and the insurance paid out to me, I would have no incentive to let Emily keep the house. By convincing me the policy was worthless, he was protecting her inheritance, ensuring I wouldn't contest her ownership of the property after his death. Every piece of the puzzle suddenly fit together. Alan had known his time was limited, had wanted to provide for his newfound sister, and had chosen to use my inheritance rather than waiting for the life insurance to pay out after his death. Then, to ensure his plan succeeded, he had created the fiction about the policy being denied. It was manipulative, calculated, and oddly also born of love, twisted and misguided love for a sister he had only recently discovered. I sat in my car, wondering what to do with this knowledge. I could confront Alan, expose his final lie. I could inform Emily, who had already offered to sell the house she now knew was purchased with stolen money. I could keep the information to myself, biding my time until Alan's death triggered the insurance payout. None of these options felt right. Each was tainted by anger or calculation or passivity. Then I remembered something Grandma Rose used to say: "When you don't know what to do what you'll be proud of later." With sudden clarity, I knew exactly what she would have done in my situation. And I knew what I needed to do as well. I returned to the hospital that afternoon. Alan looked surprised to see me, his face gaunt against the white pillows, an IV steadily dripping medication into his arm. "I know about the insurance policy," I said without preamble. I know it wasn't denied. A range of emotions crossed his face: shock, shame, resignation. He didn't deny it. Why the lie, Alan? After everything else, why one more deception? He closed his eyes briefly. "I was trying to protect Emily. I thought if you believed the insurance wouldn't pay out, you might let her keep the house out of pity, or at least not fight her for it after I'm gone. You didn't trust me to do the right thing on my own, without manipulation?" "I don't know," he admitted softly. "I've made so many wrong choices, Leah. At some point, lies become reflexive. I'm sorry." I sat beside his bed, studying the man I had once believed I knew completely. "I've made a decision," I said finally. "About the house, the money, all of it." Alan looked at me warily, too exhausted for hope. "I'm going to let Emily keep the house," I said. His expression shifted to disbelief. "After everything? Why?" "Not for you," I clarified. "Not even for her, though I believe she deserves better than to be caught in your web of deception. I'm doing it for me, because I refuse to let your betrayal change who I am." I leaned forward, wanting him to understand. "My grandmother taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in dignity, in integrity, in the capacity to do what's right even when it costs you." Alan's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve your kindness." "This isn't kindness," I corrected him. "It's clarity. When the insurance pays out after your death, I'll have more than enough to rebuild. But Emily only has the house, a gift she didn't know was stolen. I won't take that from her." I stood to leave, but Alan caught my hand. "What about us? About our marriage?" "There is no us anymore, Alan. You ended that with your choices. I'll see that you have proper care until the end. I'll even visit when I can. But we're done as husband and wife." In the weeks that followed, I legally separated my finances from Alan's, worked with Helen to document the life insurance as partial repayment for the stolen inheritance, and met regularly with Emily to establish a cautious friendship independent of our connection to Alan. His condition deteriorated rapidly, just as his father's had. I visited him regularly, not out of obligation, but out of a commitment to my own humanity. I refused to let bitterness consume the good memories or define my future. 3 months after our confrontation, Alan passed away peacefully in hospice care. Emily and I were both at his bedside, an unlikely pair united by the complicated man who had connected and wounded us both. The insurance company paid the claim without question. As promised, I left Emily the house, my grandmother's voice, guiding my decision. Wealth without integrity creates weakness. Instead of focusing on what I had lost, I turned my attention to honoring my grandmother's true legacy. Not the money, but the values she had lived by. I established a scholarship foundation for women pursuing careers in real estate and property development. I volunteered with a financial literacy program, teaching young people about managing money ethically. My father often reminds me that most people never face the kind of moral test Alan's betrayal presented. The measure of your character, he says, isn't that you were betrayed, but how you responded to it. What Alan didn't know, what changed everything, wasn't just that the insurance policy was valid. It was that in trying to protect his sister through deception, he had underestimated the power of truth and integrity. He never understood that real legacy isn't measured in property or possessions, but in the principles that guide our choices, especially when those choices are difficult. In the end, I reclaimed not just my financial security, but something far more valuable: the certainty that even in the face of profound betrayal, I remained true to the values that matter most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.